Hello, my pleasure seekers, and welcome to today's episode. I have the beautiful Sarah O'Connor, who I am so excited to have on today. And I know I always say this when I'm about to interview someone, but just the brief conversation we've had beforehand, I know there's so many amazing questions that you, the listeners, are going to benefit from, particularly when it comes to the world of love and how we can tap into our beautiful bodies more as well. So, Sarah, thank you so much for joining me today. Who is the beautiful Sarah O'Connor?
So, hi, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I'm Sarah O'Connor, and I am a love and empowerment coach, and I am here to help women who feel like they are too much and bold women who feel that they are unlucky in love to flip that script on its head and become more authentically themselves and more empowered so that they are able to attract in and manifest their happily ever after. Not so that it's a possibility, but so that they get into the energy of like, it's inevitable for me.
Oh, so good. So where's the stem from? Where have you managed to create naturally this kind of this business?
So this has originated from the fact that I was not this at all. So roll back 5 years and I was the walking embodiment of a car crash in my love life.
Oh,
Like
honey,
an
I'm sure.
oh, you're going to tell me I'm not, but trust
Okay,
me.
yeah. But anyway,
we can we
sorry.
can definitely get into like why I definitely was. But that's where all my learning came from, right? So I was anxiously attached. I was entirely preoccupied by men and dating and love. I was addicted to dating apps.
Mm.
And prior to me kind of deciding to work on this particular area of my life, I had been single for a year, having broken up with my ex, who I was engaged to. And during the kind of crumbling of that relationship, I was like trying really hard to hold it all together. And it ended up he had a secret drug habit, which was nice. And then that manifested as him stealing from me, me having to like hide my purse in the house, him like taking things from the house to sell, him not coming home, him turning his phone off, and me just having to constantly make kind of excuses for him. And all the while, everyone's asking me how excited I must be about the wedding. And
Oh my
I was
God.
like, oh my God, like I'm absolutely like I feel like I'm just like crumbling like inside, just trying to like work on this facade, and everything was falling apart. So I ended up ending that relationship and just got this real sense of like freedom. I was really like relieved, I think, to kind of like finally get myself back. And then in that year, it was really interesting starting to date again.
Mm.
And my first like initial like wake up, I think, was talking to my mum after we'd been broken up for a few months. And I was like, do you know what this weird thing is, mum? I don't feel like I've just lost the love of my life. Like, I was like, I feel like, my friend, if her husband had started doing this to her, like she'd be sad and she probably would have ended it. But there would be this deep sadness in her that, the person that she thought she was supposed to be with is now gone. And I was like, I don't feel like that. Like I feel like I'm actually quite relieved that he turned out to be an idiot, because if he had actually just been like the nice guy, I'd be married to him, probably have a couple of kids and be living a very uninspiring, inauthentic life. And I remember thinking, like, I feel like I've followed all the rules of what you're supposed to do. And I feel like this is an awakening that a lot of women who get divorced have. Like, I feel like I just sort of skipped over having to have the marriage and the divorce, and it just kind of the epiphany
Nice.
came. Yeah, right. The epiphany had like came from just that situation in and of itself. And I remember thinking, like, I've followed all of the rules that you're supposed to do to like have a happy life and whatever. And I feel like I followed a roadmap thinking I was going to get to, I don't know, the Seychelles, and I ended up in Skegness. There was a beach, there was a bit of sun, but it wasn't where I thought I was getting, right? Like that's essentially what I think happened. And I'm like, so at that point I was like, I don't know what's happened here, like, but I know that all bets are off. Like all bets are off now. Like anything that someone thinks I should be doing because society expects it, you can all fuck off. Like I was just like, absolutely not. I was like, and I so then with that, I was trying to figure out what this was leading me to. And I went to, I went to some retreats, and I went to like a self-love summit, and I was just trying to follow this kind of like path, and all the while dating and starting to also get self-awareness around the fact that I didn't really know who I was when I was dating. If I liked them, I would feel like I was sort of performing. I had like I felt like I was maybe a bit too much for people, and and I was renovating my house at the time, and I remember sort of, or I was about to, and I remember thinking like, oh, who's going to want me when I've got this lovely house? Like, maybe that's gonna be really intimidating, or do you know what I
Oh,
mean? Like, there's so many things that were like in my head, and I just wasn't showing up for myself, and it started to feel like a performance, and I was like, I don't know what's going on here. And that's when I started working with a love coach as well, being like, okay, it's time now to really dig into this, and dig into like my patterns and everything. And from that, like the initial like awakening that I had of like all bets are off, that kind of got me on the path of empowerment coaching, where I was like, I'm going to share this kind of this like burning like knowing that I now have, that like, guess what, we're all doing it wrong. You're not meant to just follow what everyone tells you to do. And then that then coupled with then what I found out and realized that really my main Achilles heel, and the thing that really was most important to me, had always been love. So now getting to be a love and empowerment coach feels very fitting.
wow. Oh my gosh, that's such a beautiful story. It probably didn't feel like it at
No.
the time. Um, if we take like a million steps back,
Mm-hmm.
when you were with your ex fiance at the
Mm-hmm.
time, now looking back, did you feel you intuitively knew things before the obvious signs were there of like hiding your past, that he wasn't the right match for you at the time?
Yeah.
To sharing, like, what were they?
Yeah, absolutely. So I always say this, I'm like, to be honest, if I'd been really, really honest with myself, there was, within the first 3 months, I could have walked away. Like, I could have been like, actually, this isn't a fit. He would um lie about small things. He like, and things even just like, I didn't find him inherently that interesting. I was just going out with him because he was really nice, and you're supposed to fancy the nice guy. And like, I've been out and been obsessed with guys that are awful and toxic or whatever. So I knew I didn't want that. I knew how to look out for like really glaringly obvious red flags. But also then there was like enough like nice things happening that then I was like, oh well, it probably is all right. Like, this is probably what you're supposed to be doing. Like, it's okay. And that's the thing, that's what most women say to me. They're like, I feel like it's like toxic and exciting, or it's like safe and boring. Like,
It's
I
a new
don't like.
level of pistachio. Do you know what I mean?
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, they've got no idea how, like, and that's where I think a lot of time you feel a bit broken, because you feel like there's something clearly wrong with me, because I don't fancy the ones that are nice to me,
Mm.
and I'm just like so turned on or whatever by the ones that are mean to me. And we don't know how to make that okay. And then if having a relationship, or being in a relationship is really important to you, I think a lot of people end up settling, like in their quest to settle down, they settle, and it's not the same thing.
Isn't that
Like,
interesting?
yeah, their standards, their expectations.
Even when you say the word settle, I always hate that word.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, the way you've just said it sounds so much not more appealing. The way you've just said settle to settling down,
Yeah,
like there's a far more like better energy and connotation around it.
yeah. And that's the difference. Like, I've settled down in terms of like, I'm settling down, and I'm creating this like real like loving home with my new partner, but I haven't settled by lowering my standards of the type of person that I want to share and build a life with. It's
That
such a subtle difference, but it's so important.
and I think we're conditioned like from the get-go, or from no one's fault, to be married, like you said, by a certain age, to have kids, picket fence, and all these things.
Yeah.
So how did you handle the remarks when you turned around to people and you were like, I'm not marrying so and so, like, because you're going through an absolute like life haul, and then you have to deal with other people's shit.
Judgment of it. Yeah. Yeah, it was definitely interesting. I think the main reaction, actually, because he'd been so terrible towards the end, that I think helped. So I was able to say, oh, it's ending because he's done all of these absolutely awful things. And everyone's like, oh yeah, I mean, obviously, like, well done for ending it. So a lot of people did say a lot of women would just want the wedding and they'd have just gone ahead with it anyway. So
Yeah.
people were like, they kind of acknowledged that that's something that sometimes happens. And I was like, it's been so bad for the last few months, I physically wouldn't have been able to have carried on. Like it got so bad. I was like, but actually, I've got so much respect for the women who end it when there isn't something quite so catastrophic happening, when they just get that inner knowing of like, I don't think this is right and I can't quite put my finger on it. And like, I think how brave that is, like, for women that have done that. Or even then just, when women have gone through a divorce and they're like, oh yeah, I shouldn't have ever done that. Like, I shouldn't have done it.
It's so, they always say, like, whenever you go through like a life-changing event, yeah, and you reflect back on it, and you, like you said, you're like 3 months in, you were like, oh, this wasn't right. If I look at, I've done this recently, looked at all my relationships and I wrote them out. I mean, it's not loads of them, but I wrote them out in my diary and I was like, it's the same pattern in every single one of them. And did
Mhm.
my gut know within a few weeks or months? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, if I'm being really honest, but
Yeah.
that comes down to our conditioning, doesn't it? Of like, and also our, it's a lot to do with our attachment style as well, in terms of what we believe is possible for us. So if you have an anxious attachment style, that invariably means you've got a scarcity mindset. So you don't believe that there's enough partners to go around. You don't believe that you're going to get chosen. So when you've got that mindset, you then, that then invokes certain emotions, normally fear, overwhelm, sadness, fear of rejection, all those sorts of things. So then you settle, you lower your standards of what you will accept, because you sort of deep down believe, well, if it's not this person, it's probably no one, and I'd rather not be alone. And that's
And
really dangerous.
did you share that, was that the attachment style you had?
Yeah.
That's how I was, when you were saying this, I'm like, that's definitely my attachment
Yeah.
style.
Well, I didn't know what an attachment style was, which I think there's like a pro and a con to how much information is available online now, where you can kind of like self-assess, like what's the matter with you, or like why you behave in a certain way. I think there was something really refreshing and probably quite useful about the fact I was like, I don't know what's wrong with me. Like, let's just go for it. And so I did all this, work on myself. And I still remember thinking, like, this still doesn't make much sense, like parts of it. And I remember then going to a therapist and being like, so she was like, tell me about X, Y, and Z. And then she was like, so you're anxiously attached. And I was like, no, I've read about it. I'm securely attached. And like, I was so confident. And she literally went, no, Sarah, you aren't. I was like, oh, what do you mean? I was like, what? Like, why? What are you on about? And then she explained it, and I was like, oh, okay. Like, but there's something quite like confronting about learning your attachment style. But then there's also something very powerful, because you can realize that you're not the only person that's like it, and that the way that you are behaving is a symptom of kind of like inbuilt beliefs. But when you do the work to kind of raise your self-esteem and kind of let go of old stories and what you've made certain situations mean, you then get to choose. So that's a really empowering part of it. Like, you get to choose to embody how a securely attached person shows up. So that's someone who's, is really happy with like interdependency, so having time to themselves and being with a partner. They just inherently believe that there's just enough love to go around, and that they're deserving of it. They just have got this just real calm sort of approach towards dating. They don't really fear so much having like awkward or difficult conversations, because they don't believe that a relationship's really fragile. They think that they know that a relationship is built off the back of difficult conversations, and it's probably just going to help. They don't try and minimize someone else's opinions or feelings and be like, you deal with it by yourself. They're like, yeah, okay, I can see what you mean, or maybe we can look at it like this. Like, they've just got, it's a very calming sort of presence. But when you're anxiously attached, you will become attracted to avoidantly attached, because they will push you away and they will make you work really hard to be loved. And that subconsciously is proving to you what your belief is, which is that you're hard to love, and that the love is hard.
Totally. I went on a detox, a man detox in March when I left Australia to come back to the UK temporarily. And and I did a man detox, and all of them were, yeah, that. that avoidant of like running, working for the love. And I knew, I was like, this is just fucked up, excuse my language, but like this is feels wrong. It's just
Hmm.
I'm fed, also fed up. Like,
Yeah, I'm exhausted.
how it works. It
I'm
doesn't
exhausted
work.
with trying to figure out what I'm supposed to do to
Yeah.
get them to stay. And the answer is you're not. You're meant to work, like value yourself enough to walk away.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. But it's really difficult to spot it because you're like, but I fancy them so much. It's like, no, your nervous system's just like really on high alert because you don't know whether you're going to hear from them or not. Like that's not love. That like, and I liken it to when people say, I'm like, they don't fancy like the nice guys or whatever, or things like that. I'm like, well, the first thing you need to do is stop, like spot your pattern of like chasing the bad ones and ignoring red flags and things like that, and detox yourself from that like toxic playground. Because when you're on it, you're kind of addicted to like the roller coaster feeling, right? So when you're on a roller coaster, you know it's going to be like whoosh, here, there, everywhere. This feels amazing. You're really like your adrenaline's all like jacked up, and that's the cycle of a toxic like relationship and a toxic person and a dynamic. And the amazing healthy love that's like the slow burn, that's like this like majestic kind of feeling, I tell people to imagine it like it's a hot air balloon ride, right? It's still amazing, it's just so much slower. But if you got into a hot air balloon ride expecting the adrenaline rush and the exhilaration in the same way as a roller coaster, you're going to be really disappointed and you're going to tell me you're bored. You're not bored, you're just not appreciating it because you're expecting it to be different, but it's not.
And I love this analogy because I also feel like a lot of people, if they expect that, and it's like an addiction to be with someone, to give them that, and then they walk away from it. I've had this before with guys, and they've walked away from dating me, and then afterwards they've been like, shit, grass isn't greener on the other side, because they then realize that what else they've been chasing hasn't gone
Hasn't
hasn't gone
gone the way they
to plan,
wanted
because
either.
it's up and down 24/7.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's spotting your pattern. Like you said, it's spotting the pattern of like, oh, I can spot that normally when someone pulls away, I chase them. And now it's like, bring myself back into my body, bring myself back into the current moment, and and like noticing the pattern and choosing something different. So it's really about pattern awareness. And then you only change when you commit to taking a different action. So like I remember this happening to me when I was like trying to learn to show up differently. I remember getting loads of attention from a guy, and I knew he wasn't really very good for me, but I was like, oh, there's still this little fizzle of like validation that I liked from you, like giving me attention. And
Oh,
then one morning he just like, he pretended like I wasn't there. He just like switched off, and I was like, you fucking joking? Like I was like, I'm so annoyed, like I was really angry. um and then I was like, oh, now what I want to do and what I normally do is now perform and try and get his attention in a certain way and sort of like move towards him, and those sorts of things where I was like, oh, I'm gonna say this because I know that's going to get a reaction out of him. And it was like, no, no, today I just carry on like normal, as if like I'm not playing to the pattern that I'm so used to, and I'm creating new habits. And it was so interesting then just like seeing how I was able to, and like I've done a lot of work on like my mindset as well, of like what's meant for you won't miss you, like, and also kind of knowing that he wasn't like the guy for me anyway. You know, you just, I know that you're like covered in red flags, like I know that I shouldn't fancy you, but you're just like really handsome, so whatever. But it's like that kind of like processing of like, oh yeah, I normally do this, and now I've got so much awareness, I now choose to show up differently, because you have to show up differently before you feel ready to, like, you don't start to embody the version of you that kind of feels worthy of it and amazing until you start to do it when you feel awful and you're like, oh god, I don't really know what I'm doing, and I don't know how to talk, and I don't know what to say. But all you've got to do is just like connect back to like, but I know that this is a pattern that's keeping me stuck, and I'm committed to not being stuck anymore.
yeah, I feel like I'm actually in that place at the moment where I feel like I'm a chick that's hatching out of a new egg, and I'm a bit
Yeah.
like, oh,
Oh
I'm
god.
just gonna say no to you, but I really kind of want to say yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And so how did you meet? You shared you've got a partner now, which is all the
Yes.
behind.
Yeah.
How did you meet them?
On Tinder.
Oh, okay.
I know, not even joking. So many people are like, oh my god, a Tinder success story.
Love that.
Yeah. So we met, it'll be 3 years in December. So I'd done a lot of my healing. I'd done a lot of swearing off dating. Like I hadn't been on dating apps for a while. And then I went back onto dating apps to try to give them a go. Well, it was during lockdown as well. So it was kind of like 2020. So it was just obviously a bit mental. But I'd noticed that I could get really addicted to dating apps if I was really seeking validation and whatever. I could get very much like, oh, just like, quick adrenaline hit of like someone liking you back and then a chat and whatever. So I'd noticed that. So I had some new rules for myself around like, okay, if you're feeling thirsty, don't go on them. Like if you're feeling like you need validation, don't go on them. If you're feeling upset and you're trying to not feel your feelings, don't go on them. There was a lot of reasons to not go on them. And then it was like, I'll go on them when I've got, and I'm like quite good energy. I feel quite lighthearted. Everything feels sort of in equilibrium. And I'm going to approach it with high standards, but no expectations, right? So I'm not going to expect this to turn into anything. I'm going to go in with high standards of like what I want. I'm going to go in with my playful energy. It's okay to flirt. It's okay to, be myself and express myself, but also with that, I'm not going to try and pretend that I'm not looking for a relationship. And I'm just going to keep focused on who they're showing me they are, as opposed to who I want them to be. Because that I would often attach ideas of who they were or what we might become, and then ignore who they were. And that's essentially what happened with my ex. I was about to turn 30 when we met, and I think I had that kind of like expectation of everyone telling me that I should be settled down, and that feeling of shame that I wasn't with someone, that I then was like, yeah, you seem nice, I'll romanticize this, and I'll ignore all the red flags that you're going to show me at the start anyway, to show me that you aren't really my person. So those were kind of like my rules, like, and my little like standards and my boundaries for myself around how I was going to approach it. And it worked really well. Like I went on not that many dates, and it was always like to the park for a little walk or whatever, because you weren't allowed anywhere else. And there were opportunities for me. I feel like the universe was like testing me and sending me like chances to be like, oh, you said you've learned this lesson, you said you've recognized this pattern, so here we go. So yeah, I remember one guy being really really lovely, and we'd been talking for maybe a couple of weeks, and then one day he just turned into like the weirdest person. Like he literally just like accused me of like playing games and all that, like just out the blue. And I was like, what is going on? So I said to him, I was like, what are you playing at? So we had this conversation. He was like, absolutely adamant that I was like being a dick or whatever. And I was about to like let what had already happened and how much we'd already got on and had in common and all those sorts of things gloss over what he was now showing me. And one of the things that I'd done and got really clear on was what does my dream relationship feel like? Well, it feels safe, and it feels like no one's going to be making drama out of nothing, and it feels like fun and like that, playful and all that sort of thing. And I was like, right, is he showing that that's the qualities that he has to be able to create that? No, absolutely not. He's like waving a big red flag. So it's like, I'm done. I'm not talking to him anymore. Like, and just cut it off. So it was really interesting getting to that stage where it was like, oh, I get to check in with this like feeling. How does it feel? So like that's kind of like a real part of like manifestation, isn't it? Like really getting clear on how it feels. But the key thing that most people don't talk about with manifestation, or haven't like mastered, is then, okay, that's then got to inform your actions. Like your actions have got to be different when someone's showing you who they are. Like you can be in denial if you like, but there's no point. Like it's only taking you further away. So I've like I started to learn to, instead of romanticizing a person, I would romanticize the me getting it right with the universe, and like being like, you've sent me a test, I've got it right, isn't that fun? Like I'd romanticize that as opposed to the person, and that was quite fun. Like just sort of taking like the heaviness out of it, because obviously when you cut something off and you think it might have been going somewhere, there can naturally be like oh god, I feel quite disappointed, like I'm quite disappointed about that. And it's not about pretending that you aren't, but it's then just coming back to a belief of like, what's meant for me won't miss me. what misses me was never meant for me. Like if what's meant for me feels like what I'm visualizing, then it's not him, and that's okay, because what's meant for me won't miss me. This is just clearing the path so that there's like a clear channel for that to come through and for that to manifest.
I think that that comes down to self-worth as well. Like people don't talk about this enough in manifestation. You can like put all the things on your vision board and like you say, date all the not so right men, but actually if you don't feel worthy of it, you're still putting that out that you're happy to settle for something mediocre.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I did that, and then that's how I started going back on the dating apps sort of like April, May time, and then met my boyfriend in the December. Of a few dates here and there, bit of chatting here and there, deleting and reinstalling, because it was like, oh no, I don't feel great now for the next 2 weeks, I'm just going to focus on me again. And I was really very open to meeting somebody in real life as well, kind of like, so I set the intention of really whenever I would go out, I would try to be as present and in the moment as I could. And that's a question I get asked a lot, like, oh, should I be going to places where I'm likely to meet somebody, or should I like get on the dating apps because I'm trying to meet somebody? And what I say is the first thing to practice is practice creating connection anywhere and everywhere you go with whoever is around you. So like phone down, like relax your shoulders, smile, have this like open receiving energy, and be present with the people and the things and the places you're in. And that's going to give you connection. That's going to give you the feeling of presence. And that's all you've got. Like if whenever you attach happiness to like, well, it's going to happen when this comes in and when that comes in, you're going to miss all your opportunity to be present and in the moment and happy now. And when that thing arrives, you won't know how to appreciate it then either until you start appreciating what's in the here and now. So if you start practicing that, then you're going to experience more joy, you're going to experience more peace, you're going to be less in your head. And it's a really great way to practice it, so that when you've practiced being kind of like open and in the moment, like over and over again, everywhere you go, when you do then meet somebody that you really fancy and you're like, oh God, I'm really nervous. I feel like I want to get in my head. It's like, oh, but I've practiced being this person with people and just being in the moment with them. And that helps to, and it makes you really magnetic, to be honest. Like it makes you very magnetic to people, because when you walk in somewhere and you're like, their energy is really good. Like that generally happens because someone's really there. Like they're there. And when I first started doing it, like really cultivating that feeling of like openness and being in the moment, my mum definitely thought I'd met somebody way before I did, because she was just like, you're sort of glowing. And I was like, oh, thanks. So thanks. That's
So
nice. And it was like, and I remember thinking, you're expecting me to tell you I've met somebody soon, and you're wrong. I haven't. I've just learned how to be happier in the moment.
and in yourself by the sounds of things too.
Yeah, absolutely. But that again came from like being very honest with myself and about where I was tripping myself up, and where I was in denial about the part I played in all of my love life experiences. I in my bio, you'll see that I say that like unlucky, and unlucky is like in inverted commas, like someone's unlucky in love. Normally that feeling of being unlucky in love comes from more than just one experience, like more than just one bad experience. It normally comes from an accumulative amount of experiences where you're like, oh, this never works out for me. Like, why is it always so easy for my friends, or why do they get picked and I don't? And when you have that mentality and that feeling, it will always be because there are ways that you are getting in your own way that you haven't seen, you haven't addressed, you haven't seen your patterns. And when you do, you're able to then be like, right, well, now I've seen it, I can't unsee it. And now I've got to choose to take different action and deal with whatever's coming up kind of like for me, and emotionally and spiritually, whilst I work through that. There'll be many dark nights of the soul while you do the work, but it's worth the pain in the short term for the long-term gain. So
And was there anything like confronting, like a blind spot, as it were, that was pointed out to you where you were like, oh my gosh?
yes, so I had always held very firmly the idea that I was like always the girl with the funny guy stories. So I was always the girl that had like guys on the go. There was normally always a few like guys in the messages. And I always would normally, and I was quite, sexually liberal, I suppose. And I kind of really held on to that, like, I'm funny and I'm funny about guys. Like this is like part of my identity. Like this, I don't, if I'm not her, I don't really know who I am. So if I had a bad date, I'd be able to make it a funny story. Like I would always be able to turn it into like sort of showmanship, I guess, because what I realized I was doing was being able to turn it into a funny story meant I never had to really acknowledge that the situation might have caused me any sort of pain, or that I was devaluing myself with the things I was doing and the people that I was accepting. And that was really confronting. Like, it was really confronting. I remember saying to my coach, I was like, oh God, like I feel a bit sick about the amount of times that I've just like got into bed with people, or like, just like flirted and just really devalued myself and not appreciated myself with guys that just didn't give a shit about me. Like that's like not liberation at all. Like that feels awful. And I was like, but I don't know. I was like, I don't know who I am if I'm not the girl with the funny stories about guys. And she laughed and she went, Sarah, you're funny. You'll be funny about something else. Like, just, it's fine. Like, it's fine. And I was like, okay, that's fine. But like, it's really confronting to kind of really see in explicit detail, like, oh, that's why I don't feel worthy, because I keep getting into people who don't value me. Like, there's really nothing liberating about feeling like you're sexually self-expressed and liberated if then what you're really craving is for someone to love you. That's not liberation. And it can be really hard to like untangle what's good because you might have a high sex drive and you like being desired, versus you're really craving someone to respect you and you think that leading with sex is going to make them fall in love with you.
Isn't that crazy? A lot of like women think they need to be like that certain sexual way to attract their partner, when actually sometimes, don't want to generalize it, you're not going to be attracting the right people.
No. Well, the thing is, it's fine. Like, if you're in your sexual liberation era, like, babes, go for it. Like, have the best time, but make sure it's actually because you're enjoying yourself and you're not trying, like check in with yourself of like, because I was really disconnected from my feelings. Like, I didn't allow myself to really feel the the upset or hurt that once we had our clothes on, that he, the guy that was with me didn't care about me. I would just be like, oh yeah, no, of course, yeah, it's fine, I'm fine. I was like, I like sex anyway, so whatever. Like, I'd really like brush it off. And when I had to acknowledge like how sad it had made me, and I'd completely disconnected from that sadness, like letting that all come up to be healed is, yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of work, but it's so worth it. And then, my new boundary was, I don't get in, I don't have casual sex anymore. Like that was it. It was like, I just don't, and I won't be going to bed with someone until there's mutual respect and some sort of emotional connection there that's been proved with a bit of time. So I didn't set, like, I'm not one for, oh, no sex until date 3 or date 5 or whatever. It's more a case of, I was willing to trust myself to learn as I went, and to trust them for who they were. And before I slept with my partner, now I remember thinking, okay, I'm a bit nervous because there's like actual feelings here.
Yeah.
So that's going to be a bit new for me because I haven't done that for a while. And then it was like, oh God, like, what happens if, he's been messing me around and he's just been saying, what I think, what he thinks he needs to get me into bed, and then I'm never going to hear from him. And I remember like just sort of like having a little word with myself and just being like, you can only know what you know at the minute. Like, you can't, like, I can't predict what's going to happen, and it might not work out. And if it doesn't, then that's okay. Like, what's meant for me won't miss me. And this feels like the next natural progression in our dating story. So it feels like the right time. And if he has fooled me, then I've gone into it with, my energy is clear on this. Like, my intentions are good. I'm not doing it for validation. I'm not doing it because I think that's going to make him stay. I'm not doing it for anything other than, this feels like it's going to be really fun. like this feels like it's going to be the right thing, and I'm nervous because, you know, acknowledging like my nerves of like, and we like each other, so this is going to be interesting.
Did you acknowledge, did you tell him that you how you're feeling?
Yeah, we did. Yeah,
Yeah, I
that
love
was,
that. Yeah.
yeah, like because being vulnerable is so important. And like I told him I was nervous before our first date, because like we'd talked for like a good few weeks, and we'd stay up for like hours and hours into the night, just like messaging each other and being like, we've got to go to sleep. And like, yeah, no, I know. And then we just didn't. And then before we met, I said to him, I was like, oh my God, imagine if we just don't fancy each other. I was like, that's going to be like terrible. Um, and he was like, yeah, he was like, I'm a bit nervous too. So it just kind of like, it was just, we were both just very like honest. I mean, you've seen my Instagram, you've said, you know, that's a theme of mine anyway.
Yeah, I love it.
Honesty, but like not just like the brutal honesty, but the honesty in terms of the vulnerability and how vulnerable it is to be honest with someone else, with your feelings and kind of what you're experiencing.
And and then so obviously it worked out well.
Yeah.
Because here you are.
Yeah.
So what would you say someone's listening right now and they're like, oh my God, I am the unlucky girl, as it were.
Hmm.
What do I do to start looking at my own patterns? Because this is really scary,
Yeah.
particularly for people that have been in the dating world for a little while. They're unconsciously attracting these different things. What's kind of a gentle sort of first step to make um, with
Yeah.
addressing these
So
things?
I think a gentle first step is really acknowledging how you're actually feeling
Mm,
about something, because that was something for me where it was starting to feel like I'm going through this motion and I'm dating this guy and I can notice that I am performing, or I'm trying to minimize who I am, or I'm trying to hide a part of me. Often if we're like quite bold and maybe outspoken, and or if you're successful and that feels like it's going to be intimidating, it's kind of acknowledging like, how am I feeling about how I'm approaching my dating life at the moment, and start to sort of notice the patterns that you go through. So I would highly recommend looking at your attachment style. There's an attachment quiz that you can do online, and the book Attached is a great place to start. Um, and if you're really serious about changing it, it's looking at, okay, if I know my attachment style, like it's important to get information, but then it's important to figure out what can I do to change it instead? Like what's the most empowered version of me? How does she behave? How does she show up in love? And then start to see where the gaps are in how you're currently showing up and
mm,
how you aren't. So in attachment theory, you can look at things like your protest behaviors. So it's kind of like ways that you respond to certain situations. And so it can be that you um, like gloss over red flags, or it could be that you incessantly call somebody, or you things that you notice. Start to get really familiar with what your pattern is, and then try to take a beat, like just before you do what your instinctive gut reaction says,
mm,
take a breath and be like, right, if I was going to show up as my best self, if I was going to show up in a way that creates different results, what do like how does she show up, what would she say? And if I could subscribe to a belief that there's plenty of love to go around, that I
mm.
don't need to be fearful of this, what action could I take right now that would be in alignment with if I believed that? Because you won't believe it straight away.
You have
So
to.
it's not trying to just pretend that you don't feel what you feel and there's no fear. It's more about, if I can choose in moment to moment, when I can notice I'm about to go into this pattern, okay, I don't want to, but I'm scared because I'm scared of abandonment, I'm scared of rejection, I'm scared that this person's my last chance for happiness, I'm scared, I'm scared.
Wow.
All of those things come up, and be like, I see you. And if I were to subscribe right now to the belief that what's meant for me won't miss me, and that me speaking my truth and me being authentic and me being my authentic self and showing up as who I was always supposed to be, if I can subscribe to the belief that like I can't make a wrong move, there's no such thing, what would I do? And then taking the brave step. And it's really hard. Like the implementation is so difficult, because there's a lot to look at. so there's a lot to look at. That's why I coach on it. That's why I invite people into programs to work on it, because it's a process. And you know, you'll just want to hide. Probably I have one-to-one clients who are like, just stop talking to me for like a week, and I'm like, hi baby, all right, you hiding, like, and they're like, yes. I'm like, okay, let's have a chat, because you just don't want to do it. It's, you know, when you start to really pay attention to how you've contributed to
Mhm.
the results that you've seen, it's confronting as much as it is empowering, and it will feel confronting before it feels empowering.
Oh, and so for anyone that wants to work with you, what kind of programs, opportunities do you have?
So the best way to work with me is I'm just turned my one-to-one coaching into a group program, and it's
Ooh.
called Love Rewritten. And it is basically for women who feel unlucky in love to be able to flip the script. Like, it's time for a motherfucking plot twist, guys. Like, it is time for you to take control of the narrative and to show up differently. So it's in 3 stages. You've got the uncover and heal. So it's like uncovering, like, not only your patterns, but like why, like what's this attached to, like what belief system is this attached to, and like situations that have happened that have made me believe this about myself. So uncover and heal. The next one is surrender and rebuild. So it's like, okay, like let's just like breathe out, like let go of all the things that I think about myself and all the things I believe, like turn a new page, and then let's rebuild the, like, I call it like the main character and energy. Like, what, like, okay, let me envisage, like, how do I show up? Like, how do I show up if this is like, if this is the relationship that I want, what do I need to do? And it helps you build your boundaries as well around all the stuff that you've discovered. So it helps you to really hold yourself accountable, to be like, right, if I'm going to get different results, I'm going to have to show up differently. And in that stage as well, we really look at leaning into learning how to be more present and in the moment, and working on your belief system. And then the last stage is manifest, like attract and manifest. And that's the bit that people just want to jump to, right? It's like,
Oh,
oh, no, I don't want to look at all the other stuff. The other
yeah.
stuff sounds awful. But it's the last stage because it's important. But that's where you get to really start to envisage, like, okay, what does the relationship feel like? That, and what, so if that's how it feels, what qualities, attributes, values does the person have? So, and which ones of those are most important to me? And then being able to really like lean into, okay, how do I manifest a life already that I love as well? So it's really building a life that you're happy with now, and building the version of yourself and starting to walk in the way that she will walk, the one, you know, the one that's going to have that amazing relationship. She moves differently to how you move currently, and you've got to get really clear on, like, how have I been doing this? Why have I been doing it? Let's forgive myself. Let's move forward and let's rebuild. So like loads of self-compassion, like loads of support. So yeah, it's a 3-month program, and it's a mixture of group and one-to-one. So you get kind of like, yeah, like the group sort of community element of it, and then also one-to-one tailored support. So yeah, that's my favorite way to work with people, because it really is, it's like my life's work. Like, it's the thing that I've had to learn so hard. Like, and there's really not much that people bring to me, and they're like, I'm feeling this. I'm like, oh yes, I remember that. Let me give you some examples of how I manage that, or what you can do, and what questions you can ask yourself to be able to pull yourself through it. Because self-mastery in this is so important.
Isn't that just so amazing? You've built your pain as your purpose.
Absolutely. It was like my biggest initiation into, like, oh, like this is who I'm supposed to be. And like this work changed my entire life. Like, being able to really see how some of who I thought I was born out of like painful experiences from the past, and they were there to like protect me. Being able to be like, oh, that gets to fall away. Like I always say to my coach, I was like, you know, when I finished working with you, and then through all the therapy and everything that I did afterwards, like, I've come through it so different, but more myself than I've ever been,
Wow.
because I let go of all the things that I thought were wrong with me. I forgave myself for the ways that I'd been, and I let protective parts of myself that just didn't need to exist anymore, they were allowed to fall away. So a more authentic version of me could lead, because the version of me that was operating before wouldn't have been able to have had the relationship I have now. I
Mm,
wouldn't have been able to have received the love that he was trying to give me. I wouldn't have been able to like communicate authentically, because I wouldn't have really acknowledged how I was feeling.
mm,
And yeah, and like being able to be vulnerable enough to actually communicate in a way that's like, I'm going to let you sort of see me and my heart and my vulnerabilities now. Like, that's really scary. But yeah, he's securely attached, like through and through. And I said to him once, I was like, you're so caring of like how I'm feeling, or like checking if I'm all right or whatever. And I was like, I've never been with anybody before who like cares that much or like asks. And he went, well, you're not that normal yourself, Sarah. And I was like, what do you mean? And he went, well, do you know how many times I might have asked somebody that and they've told me I'm fine? And I'm like, oh yeah. I was like, I'd have done that a few years ago. He was like, well, I'm glad you wouldn't anymore. So that's the thing. Like, you can be with somebody, but if you don't know how to be vulnerable and actually tell somebody how you're feeling, they
mm,
can't show up for you. They can't be there for you. You're not having a real connection with somebody if you're in performance mode or you're guarding yourself. Like, and it's inherently really vulnerable to be like, oh, actually, I'm feeling like this and I'm going to need this. It's really, really challenging.
mm. Totally. And I feel in my experience, once I'm vulnerable in one situation, I'm vulnerable in work situations and everything. And sometimes almost like, when like the barista asks you at Starbucks, I'm like, whoa. Yeah, because I think like that creates connection in ourselves and with other people. And like goes back to your point earlier around put the phone down if you're going to a cafe or something and
Mm,
be connected with people around you, but also be vulnerable if you feel safe too. And like,
yeah,
in
it's
sense,
appropriate, and yeah,
exactly. Then like practice and enjoy it. Because it's also,
yeah,
and I know we always use the word working on ourselves, but I never want people to feel broken as well. Like what's
totally.
happened, like what you've done, you've used this as your way of helping the world. So I think it's just so empowering and so inspiring. And for anyone that's listening, where can they find you?
So I hang out a lot on Instagram.
Yeah.
So my handle is iam.sarah.o'connor. And if this feels like it's good, but it's a lot, like, and you're like, I just want to see, like, feel my way through it, I also do have an Align and Shine bundle that people can access as well. So that's like a bundle of how to access your most authentic self. So I've got a 3-part framework for that as well, where we'll look at your ability to be vulnerable, communicate, and connecting to your mind, body, and soul. So it's kind of like the 3 connection there. So being able to embody that can be really useful to become the most authentic version of yourself. And then Love Rewritten's a great way to use that, because like you'll learn that in Love Rewritten as well. But if you want a little taste of that, then you can. And I have got a mini course on boundaries as well. But yeah, so I've got, yeah, come and hang with me on Instagram. I love it over there.
Okay, amazing. And also, are the other two courses, are they a mixture of group, one-to-one? What do they, the boundaries and the other alignment course, what do they look like?
Yeah, so the Align and Shine bundle at the moment is kind of self resources. So it's self-paced. So there's some masterclasses in there on self-love. There's some challenges in there, and some kind of like pre-recorded, just like me talking about why these different things are important and how you can start to embody it, and questions like journaling prompts that you can ask yourself, to really see like who am I? Am I hiding? Am I expressing? Am I, all those sorts of things, like what's really true for me. And then the Unbox Your Boundaries is a self-paced 3-part mini course, that you can buy. So and then I will be starting actually doing some live Voxer weeks as well. So if you wanted some like group coaching, but in a more kind of like, I have some questions, I feel like this is coming up, and you want to maybe just get my ear on things, I'm going to be releasing those as well.
Oh my gosh, amazing. Okay. Well, I will put everything in the show notes where you, the listeners, can reach out and find Sarah. And thank you so much today for sharing your gifts and all those tips and for being so vulnerable yourself as well. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much. It's been absolutely awesome to be here. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
Cheers.